Week 0 is officially in the books, and it was quite the week for having only really one important game between Florida State and Georgia Tech. We're going to go ahead and get our reactions out of the way in this video instead of doing just a full separate video, because that was really the only important game from last week. Georgia Tech, I did say was going to keep that game close, but I picked Florida State to win it. I wasn't necessarily surprised by the result, but I did make the incorrect pick there. Georgia Tech is looking like a pretty solid team. They looked like the better team than Florida State. So I think Georgia Tech definitely did deserve to win that game, but that's not to say Florida State's not going to be good this year. I think that Florida State could still very easily finish at 9-3 or so. They can still make the ACC championship. It's not completely over, but they are definitely going to have to improve, especially DJU throwing the ball down the field against some defenses that are better than Georgia Tech that they're going to have to face this year. As far as how the top 25 is going to go, this is going to be my ranking based on who would win games played on a neutral field. So the best team at the very top, all the way down to 25. These are my 25 best teams in the country, and if a team is above another one, I think that they would beat them on a neutral field. It's definitely tough to do preseason, but once we get into the regular season, it's going to slowly start moving to be more based on the field results. Head to head will play a factor, especially at first, but eventually, if Georgia Tech were to start losing games and Florida State goes on to beat Miami or something like that, there's always going to be room for Florida State to move back ahead of Georgia Tech. But head to head is very important, and who would win on a neutral field is going to be the main determining factor in this poll. We'll be a bit more in depth on each of these teams once the season gets going. I did release a preseason top 25 poll a few months back, and for the most part, the teams haven't really changed that much. There hasn't been any major developments that are causing me to need to reevaluate a ton of different things. So a lot of things have stayed pretty similar. Wisconsin's at 25 and Iowa at 24. I think the Hawkeyes are a little bit better. They might not have a great offense, but their defense is going to lead Iowa to be a really solid team. Just a bit better than Wisconsin. I'd take the Hawkeyes on a neutral field. Obviously, Georgia Tech and Florida State just played on a neutral field, so there's absolutely no reason that Florida State should be ranked ahead of Georgia Tech by anybody. Georgia Tech won. They looked like the better team. And I still think Florida State's a top 25 team, so we kept them in here. Georgia Tech slides up to number 22. At 21 is Kansas, and I think Kansas is actually going to start a new tier of teams above Georgia Tech. I think there's a bit of a separation there. I really like this Kansas team. I like Jalen Daniels. I think this is a really solid squad. They're going to have a chance to win the Big 12 this year, but that's a very top-heavy Big 12 with a lot of teams up there who can win it. There's a lot of teams in the middle who are going to be really solid as well. It's going to be a tough conference to win, really wide open for sure. Another Big 12 team at number 20 is going to be the Kansas State Wildcats. I have them just above Kansas. Really tough to separate those two teams. I think they are really, really close to each other, and that's definitely going to be a really good game in the middle of the season when they do play. Oklahoma at number 19. I thought about not even ranking Oklahoma because I do think the Sooners are going to struggle a bit in the SEC. I have them lower than a lot of people do, and I'm kind of iffy on Oklahoma. I think the main reason I've got them in here is right now, based on preseason expectations, I would take Oklahoma over everybody ranked below them. But I do think the Sooners would lose to Michigan, who I have at number 18. And this is going to seem really low for a lot of people. But I do have a lot of pretty good reasons why Michigan is down so low. Yes, they won the national championship last year, but with the sign stealing allegations and the notice of allegations coming from the NCAA, Michigan has 90 days to respond, and that period will be during the college football season at some point. And honestly, I think this overall is really going to hurt the school. Um, they did cheat. I think it's important for people to realize that there's been a lot of different things that have come out and proven that Michigan did gain an advantage from that. I think there's going to be some serious punishments coming, and honestly, I do think it will affect the team. There's still no answer at quarterback yet. It seems like Alex Orji is the favorite to win the starting job, but that hasn't been completely confirmed as of right now. And people seem to think that Orji was going to take a massive step forward. It hasn't really seemed like that's the case. Obviously, if things change and Michigan comes out in the first couple weeks and looks incredible, then I have no problem moving them back up into the top 10, maybe even top 5. But for right now, until I see that all these losses they've had and the sign stealing allegations and the quarterback position aren't all giant question marks, I can't put Michigan above teams that I know more about. Speaking of one of those is going to be Arizona. And Arizona, I honestly think would beat Michigan on a head-to-head on a neutral field right now. Noah Fafita is a really solid quarterback. Tetairoa McMillan at wide receiver. Arizona's got a couple stars, and I think that's going to be a main reason that they're able to outscore a lot of teams this year. Oklahoma State, though, has just as good of an offense almost, but they have a better defense than the Wildcats, which is why they're going to be ahead of them at 16. At number 15 is Tennessee, and I think this is going to be a pretty solid Tennessee team. I do have them just behind NC State, who they play early in the season, because I do like the Wolfpack in that game. But I think Nico Iamaleava and Tennessee are going to be a really strong team in the SEC this year. I think they're going to have a chance to pull off a couple different upsets. They do get Alabama at home this year. We all remember what happened the last time that Alabama went to play at Tennessee. Great game. I honestly think Tennessee is going to keep that one really close again this year, maybe even win it. This is a solid Tennessee team. The schedule is a bit tough, which could make it difficult to make the college football playoff, but I do think that they'll finish in the top 25 as long as they can meet these expectations. NC State at number 14 is a dark horse in the ACC. I think I have them ranked higher than a lot of people, but not by a ton. NC State's definitely being considered as a top 25 team by almost everybody. I really like this NC State team, though. Grayson McCall at quarterback, a lot of experience at the position. I think this is going to be a really solid team. Obviously, they have that opportunity against Tennessee early to really set the tone for the season. If they lose that game, then they'll probably end up being around a number 20 to number 25 team, somewhere in there, right at the bottom of the poll. But for right now, I do think the Wolfpack are a top 15 team. LSU, I think this is going to start another new tier of schools. So as I said before, Kansas all the way up to NC State, I think those teams are kind of separate from everybody behind them. I think another one starts here. LSU is a bit better than NC State. I think LSU would win that one without a ton of difficulty, honestly, on a neutral field. It'd be close for a while, but I think that the Tigers would pull away in the end. It's a solid LSU team. They're going to be replacing Jaden Daniels at quarterback, which is not easy. But overall, they should have a really strong offense still. The defense has some question marks, but with the offense, I do think this is going to be a really, really good LSU team still. Clemson at number 12. Didn't bring in any transfers. And overall, they still had a really solid recruiting class. They've had a solid program. I think that Dabo is going to lead Clemson back to a really good year this season, but that still could mean a 9-3 or 10-2 season. The ACC champion could very well have 2 or 3 losses, so that doesn't mean that Clemson would be out of the race for the ACC title. But Miami is our highest ranked ACC team. I think this is going to be a really good year for Miami. They brought in Cam Ward, arguably the best quarterback in the transfer portal. And this team really looks to have a lot of talent across the board. They're going to have some difficult matchups throughout the season, but if they can get through the whole regular season with a loss or two, this Miami team is going to have a real shot at making the college football playoffs, either as a conference champion or maybe even if they don't win their conference championship, as an at-large. Starting at number 10, we have Utah. And the Utes are going to be one of the best teams in the Big 12 this season. However, that conference is most likely going to have a 2 or 3 loss champion. Even though Utah is really good, I think that with how strong the middle of the conference is, there's going to be a couple teams who are able to pull off upsets, and it's a very, very strong conference near the top. There's a lot of good programs. They're going to beat up on each other. Right now, I'd say there's 5 teams that have a really solid chance of winning the Big 12. Utah probably has the best, mainly because of their schedule, and I think they are the best team in the conference. They have a solid defense, solid offense. They would beat everybody behind them, in my mind, head-to-head on a neutral field, which is why they're going to get that number 10 spot. Just barely better than Utah is going to be Penn State. And the reason that Penn State is down here at number 9 is I'm not completely confident in Drew Allar. I've seen him in big games, and I haven't really been that impressed. If you matched up Penn State against Notre Dame or Alabama or Missouri, I'm really not positive that they could win those games. A lot of people think Penn State's a really good team. I don't disagree. But in my mind, it does come down to the quarterback play in those games, and I believe that the 3 teams above them, between 6 through 10, those teams have better quarterbacks, and I think they would get the win over Penn State on a neutral field. Notre Dame brought in Riley Leonard in the transfer portal, and I think he's a really solid quarterback. It's going to be interesting to see how he adapts to the offense early. They have a tough matchup on the road against Texas A&M. There are some people who think Notre Dame should be lower, some people who think they should be higher. Well, we're going to find out in week 1 because they play at Texas A&M, a tough environment on the road to start the season. If Notre Dame looks impressive in that game, they will probably move up in my poll. If not, I could see Notre Dame dropping a little bit. Alabama at number 7. Kalen DeBoer takes over for Nick Saban. And it's going to be really interesting to see how Alabama does this year, if there is a drop-off or if they continue rolling like nothing ever happened. I think there's going to be a minor drop-off, maybe a 10-2 season, could be 9-3. They don't have the hardest schedule, but it's definitely got some tough games, including Missouri at home, Tennessee, and LSU on the road. So Alabama's going to have some tests. But overall, for the SEC, the schedule's not terrible. I did forget to mention they played Georgia. That one's going to be definitely their most difficult game. So Alabama will definitely be tested this season. Jalen Milroe is a great quarterback, so it'll be interesting to see really if the defense can keep up with how well their offense, I do believe, will be playing. If they are, then Alabama should make the playoffs. If not, then I can see this Alabama team missing out on a 12-team playoff. Now, I do think that Missouri is a little bit better than Alabama as of right now. We will see these 2 teams play, and it's at Alabama. I actually do have Alabama winning that game, but on a neutral field, I would take the Tigers. That's how close I think they are. But I do like Missouri just a bit better than Alabama, which is why we have them up at number 6. On to the top 5 with Ole Miss at number 5. The Rebels, I think, are the top team in that second tier of teams. Really strong offense this season. Jackson Dart comes back for another year at quarterback. I think this is going to be a really, really good Ole Miss team. Definitely going to be a challenge for Georgia. I do think that the Bulldogs are just a little bit better and they'll get that win. Ole Miss probably drops a game this season. It might only be that one to Georgia. Maybe they lose a second one somewhere, but I do think they'll be at least 10-2. the Rebels have a really, really solid chance of making the college football playoff. Now, the top tier of teams, I don't think anybody disagrees on this. We have Ohio State, Oregon, Georgia, and Texas. And honestly, these teams could be put in a lot of different orders. People are going to complain every time, but for the most part, they wouldn't be totally wrong. I do think that maybe Texas is probably the clear number 4 right now. They have a lot of struggles with their running back group. As we've seen, they lost multiple scholarship running backs to injury for the entire season. So that's definitely going to be a question mark they have to answer. But they did bring in Isaiah Bond in the transfer portal at wide receiver. He's going to be a great addition for Quinn Ewers to throw to. They have a really solid defense. Still definitely a top 4 school, but I do think that they are solid in that number 4 spot. The top 3, in my mind, are really interchangeable. We have Georgia at 3, though, which is probably going to surprise a lot of people because Georgia is either normally 1 or 2 in all of the polls that I've seen. However, I do think that Georgia needs to answer questions at wide receiver. They've had multiple players arrested. That's something that Kirby Smart really does need to fix. Georgia has many, many problems with DUIs and speeding, lots of different things that should not be happening on a D1 football team. Georgia has that worse than any other team in the country. That needs to be fixed, but that's not why they're at number 3. Carson Beck's a great quarterback, but I feel like Oregon on a neutral field could beat Georgia right now. I think it would be a really close game, but overall, I think that Oregon just has fewer question marks as of right now. So I would take the Ducks, which is why I have them at number 2. And at number 1 is going to be the Ohio State Buckeyes. And Ohio State has, in my mind, the most talented team in the country. I do believe they would beat everybody on a neutral field. The games against Oregon and Georgia especially would be really close. I think they'd play everybody in the top 10 really close, but I do think the Buckeyes are the best team in the country as of right now. Obviously, we will get to see Ohio State and Oregon play in the regular season, although it will be at Autzen. That should be a great game. Right now, I'd honestly lean Oregon in that matchup, and hopefully we'll have a chance to see these top 4 teams play each other in the college football playoff. I think everybody would love to see Ohio State and Georgia play, Oregon and Texas, Oregon and Georgia, Ohio State and Texas. All of those would be incredible matchups. And that's what I am hoping for at the end of this regular season because I think those would be incredible matchups. So here's what the playoff bracket would look like based on this poll. Now, these are not my playoff predictions. This is just to give you an idea of, based on where the teams are ranked, who would be in. And based on all of this, the only team in the top 12 who would not make it would be Clemson, in favor of a group of 5 champion being in, who we do have for right now as Boise State. Ohio State got the 1 spot, Georgia 2. Utah all the way down at number 10 was 3, and Miami all the way down at number 11 came in at 4. The number 2 team in the country ends up at 5 with a first round game against Boise State. And I did move a few things around because, as you know, Notre Dame was ranked below Alabama. But I did put them higher here just because I think the committee will avoid matchups like Alabama and Missouri in the first round and try and avoid as many rematches as possible. It is, after all about money, so I don't think that they would want to see a rematch in the first round. So that's why I did that. Penn State down at number 11 playing Texas. That'd be a great matchup. Ole Miss and Alabama would be really fun. The winner will have a rematch with Georgia. I couldn't quite figure out a way to avoid that. Oregon and Boise State, a rematch of the regular season. That one didn't really make sense to flip Oregon with Texas because then a lot of other things would have to move around. And if Oregon is the number 2 team in the country, they deserve to be able to play the group of 5 champion. With that all being said, thank you guys so much for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and tune in for our Week 1 predictions later this week.